Today I recall getting up at around 8 in the morning. And within 15 minutes to half an hour of that, Dad had come over, and since I'm pretty sure we pretty much left all the necessary stuff in both Mom and Dad's cars last night, so packing was pretty much non-existent the second time around. The reason why we got up so much later was at some point between yesterday and that point today, a female organizer of the Emerging Artist Expo had told Mom and I for us to get here at around 9. In the morning, since that's the time the city police close the streets for the Cornhill Festival. But they ended up closing the streets down by blocking them off with these little metal barricades with the bars on them. It looks like something you would lock a bike to, only maybe a little bit taller, maybe coming up to your hip in height, and more mobile, and that you can pick it up and move it. That's kind of like what those barricades are. They started closing the streets about 15 minutes early, and just as we were about to enter the festival grounds to get back to my tent booth for the second day, but yeah, that ended up creating a delay. And initially I had to carry, I believe it was the ordinary people bin. It was a relatively short walk, maybe about as long, if not a little longer, than yesterday's. Bathroom walk with my dad. Despite this, and Mom and Dad were able to get their cars into the festival grounds. Thus making the setting up process much easier for me. I did the general work for putting the styrofoam drawings in their respective bins within the individual bins on the shelving units out from the bigger group bins. Although Dad exerted some sort of creative control in how the styrofoam drawings should be displayed, essentially which ones would be in front of the bins or which ones would be first in the bins and thus would be most visible within those bins, among some other efforts in order to make essentially styrofoam drawings of fictional characters that people know more prominent, essentially, in an effort to increase foot traffic to my booth. I'd say I had just about as much, if not slightly more, visits by fairgoers at my tent booth today than during the first day, primarily with an increase within the first 2 to 3 hours of my second day at the expo. Basically, I noticed plenty of activity during the early part of today, and then sort of dropped off as we went into later in the day. I was at the Cornhill Arts Festival today. It started like yesterday at 10 in the morning officially. And this time around, because we got here so late, there wasn't really any people who came in unofficially early. Came in before that official time of 10 in the morning. And the festival ended at 5 p.m. or about an hour earlier than yesterday. Though I believe we started packing up somewhere between 15 and 5 minutes early. By which point the sun was pretty much completely on me by the time it was time to start packing the styrofoam drawings back in, which essentially made me sweat enough to the point where at times I was concerned that I could sweat on the styrofoam drawings. That was a concern of mine, but generally this only happened to one styrofoam drawing. according to my recollection. And of that one drawing, no harm was really done to it. It was of the rainbow styrofoam drawing that, because it had a shape different from the regular rectangular styrofoam drawings or blocks, I put it in with the unusual shapes bin. Generally for this, for the art show, generally I had an ordinary people bin, a fictional characters bin, and then lastly, an unusual shapes bin. I recall for both bringing the styrofoam drawings out and then packing them back in for the ride home. I did the ordinary people bin first, generally speaking, which, because there's so many ordinary people, it's in the biggest gray bin, gray lid container. At one point, Mom commented that due to how Dad set up the styrofoam drawings to be displayed today, it at times seemed like there were throughout the day, it seemed like that we had more styrofoam drawings, but because they took up more space on the shelving units. But in actuality, it's just that Dad made it less efficient. There were at least 2 individual bins, if not more, that only had 1 or 2 styrofoam drawings in them, so they were mostly empty. Compared to how many drawings an individual bin could hold, which generally could be 5 if it's one of the 2-inch thick, 5 to 4 if they all consist of the 2-inch thick styrofoam drawings, or more than half a dozen, somewhere between 7 and 9 if they all consist of the 1-inch thick styrofoam drawings. Throughout the day, it wasn't as much the second day, but we got some more food from the food court. And to help sample the good food that the Cornhill Arts Festival has to offer, we got ice cream again relatively early on. It was around noon, and I got the exact same ice cream the second day as I did the first day, only this time Dad went and got it, and walked back with it. It wasn't as melted this time around. And before that point, Dad gave me a muffin that I think he most likely got from Wegmans. I was thinking Tim Hortons first, but now that doesn't seem right to me because it looked exactly like a kind of muffin that I saw him get at Wegmans. I mentioned Tim Hortons because he did go to Tim Hortons in the morning today, just like he did yesterday, and got breakfast sandwiches for us. And that's the food I had first today. And I generally got to enjoy good shade coverage provided by the tent booth. It only really started deteriorating around 3:30 p.m. Or more likely, that's the point in which I noticed it, due to how the sunlight changes as the day goes on. At one point, a 21-year-old man approached my booth, and we had a pretty long conversation during which he mentioned that he's been working on a comic since 2020. There were points in which I handed out business cards to the various people who occasionally stopped by my booth. At some point, I sold 2 styrofoam drawings for $35 each. If I remember correctly, I in particular sold the styrofoam drawing I did of Batman, and along with the one I did of Deadpool, for $35 each, for a total combined sale of $70. And if I recall correctly, this was by people Dad knows, from Salvatore's. After that point, at some point, I started working on a new styrofoam drawing. And since by that point, I had at last gotten an idea. I got the idea as an excuse to try some new things, to basically do a person with a lot of body modifications. At first, it was going to be a female, but then I drew in the hat and decided to make it a male styrofoam drawing. I think I drew in some kind of cap, a baseball cap, that kind of hat. So far, I've given this styrofoam drawing things like reptile eyes, teeth that are both all silvered and sharpened to look like sharpened teeth. A chain in their mouth. A split tongue, and one of those big ring nose piercings. At one point, I accidentally drew in the sides of the bottom outline for the jacket, basically the top of the clothing, before I drew in the arms on the side, but thankfully I was able to fix that by just making a sort of black diamond tattoo pattern in order to cover that fact up. That's what I thought about. At the point I made the mistake, I didn't feel too highly of that styrofoam drawing I started. But now, by the time we had to start packing up, to go home at the end of the expo, I felt better about the new styrofoam drawing. The new drawing, I've done a good amount of the outline for this new styrofoam drawing. Making the outline it primarily involves drawing rather than coloring, which is the primary action after the outline is finished. I believe we got home somewhere between 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. I recall falling asleep around 8 p.m. and then waking up around 10 p.m. Because they set an alarm. I think last night I only got roughly 6 hours of sleep, which is acceptable if you have to do it 1 or 2 days in a row, but isn't really ideal to do every single night. Because eventually you'll rack up sleep debt. At least for some people. When we got home, I helped my parents unpack everything back into Mom's place. Which included bringing out those patio chairs back out onto the patio at the very end. We each took one of the 3 patio chairs in total, and in one trip brought them all back out on the patio at the very end of the process for unpacking the stuff we had at the expo today. I've got the 3 group bins currently in the living room because I didn't really have any space to properly store them in my room, since I've already got group bins that at this point are just partially full, but really, by the time I got done with the unpacking back into Mom's home, I was pretty exhausted and didn't feel like doing much more work. The shelving units are also in the living room, though before we brought them out into the living room, they had kind of had to tighten one bar of it, one vertical bar of each shelving unit, because they kind of came undone a little bit during the car ride back home. Something to that effect. While at the expo, when Dad got me that funnel cake, or maybe it was a gift from someone, or at least he implied that, he said that if I could eat it without making a mess, he'd get me a second ice cream, but I somehow managed to get some cinnamon and sugar on my shorts and shirt without even really picking the funnel cake up to take a bite. It somehow happened merely from me acting to take a picture of the funnel cake. So I ended up losing right away, but hey, it was still some pretty good fried dough.